I've recently been having this very deep conversation with ChatGPT, and this conversation is about immaturity. So, it started off with me just asking questions about how I should deal with immature people, because I've got a lot of them in my life. And the answer it gave me was that immature people are extremely hard to change. Immature people, they don't learn from their mistakes because they don't see their mistakes in the first place. If they make a mistake, the first thing they resort to is just sweeping it under the rug so that they don't have to deal with it. And from that, they can't grow. And so, when someone else tries to support them to grow, chances are they're just not going to do it. Because they think that there's nothing in them that really needs improving. Or that they really want to improve, because these people, they hate discomfort. That's another thing that I learned, was that immature people, they thrive on instant gratification. If it doesn't benefit them now, if they don't feel good about the thing now, then they just won't do it. They don't really think about how the future might turn out. They're too focused about now, what they want right now. But the biggest one that I needed to hear was that navigating a healthy relationship with an immature person, it's near impossible. Unless you're just super mature and you've got a lot of time and energy to spend, trying to make things work with an immature person is likely just not gonna happen. Because I also learned this other thing, and that's immaturity is the heart of all toxic relationships. Not all, but most of them. There's always the chance of stress from outside of a relationship, like, let's say, an abusive boss. Their work is stressful. There's something else outside of a relationship is just stressing this one person, or both partners, and they just end up projecting that onto each other, which is also kind of a immature thing to do. But mature people do it sometimes as well, so. But 9 times out of 10, immaturity is the reason why relationships turn toxic. And I'm just really glad I heard that, because that made me realize that trying to make it work with an immature person is just a waste of time for me, because I don't have that kind of mental fortitude to withstand all the drama and whining that I will potentially have to put up with. Of course, there are still people I know who are immature that I miss, but I wouldn't really mind talking to again. But it has helped me motivate myself to move on a bit. Go look for some more mature people. Then, as I was having this pretty light conversation, I started asking, where does immaturity come from? what is immaturity? And it turns out that immaturity is just for underdevelopment of something. Usually something inside your brains, like your emotions. Most people we will label as immature are actually just emotionally immature. And that means that their emotional capacity is underdeveloped or whatever. The way they regulate themselves, the way they deal with their emotions, the way they deal with their emotions is underdeveloped. And that is what causes them to become immature. And so I thought, pretty interesting. Immaturity is really just the underdevelopment of emotional regulation or emotional intelligence. And so I started asking, where does immaturity come from? And it gave me a list of things and said it usually comes from not being raised the best as a child. So your parents maybe probably didn't respond to your cries, or your parents didn't really model a good way of regulating your own emotions. So it usually comes from immature parents. The parents. Let's dive deeper, right? These parents, they're not that easily regulated. So when the child cries, the parent feels overwhelmed by the amount of emotion in the situation and they withdraw. They don't know how to regulate the emotions of a situation, so they just get out and leave the child to cry by itself. Eventually, the child itself will become also overwhelmed by the emotions because it's crying and no one's coming to help it. And so the child learns that emotions just lead to pain, and the brain learns that it needs to sweep the emotions away in order to prevent this overwhelming feeling. And since it keeps pushing the emotions away, it never actually deals with them. The child never actually learns to regulate themselves because they've never actually gotten the chance to fiddle around with their emotions, because it doesn't really feel safe fiddling with emotions, because every time they show emotions, the parent leaves the room. And that got me thinking. That sounds a lot like avoidant attachment style. And so that got me thinking, judging by the definition of insecure attachment styles and a secure attachment style, the secure attachment style is usually always a mature one, because the child has developed a sense of emotional regulation. When that child cried, the parents came and supported the child, even though it was in a very emotional state. And so the child learns that emotions are safe, they're not a threat, and it starts fiddling around for emotions, learning how can I cope with these emotions. And eventually the child learns. And now, while they're in adulthood, they have no problem struggling with emotional regulation or emotional intelligence because they've allowed the emotional side of things to develop, because they were allowed to feel emotions when they were younger. Well, they felt safe expressing emotions when they were younger. And so thus they become emotionally mature, right? And then insecure attachment styles. It got me thinking. These guys are always the immature ones, right? The avoidance attachment style, we already talked about that, sweeps the emotions away, never deals with them, therefore their emotional regulation skills are underdeveloped. And then anxious attachment style. I really struggled to understand this one because I've never had this style, most probably is why I don't understand it. But anxious attachment style, when the child cries, the parents aren't consistent with when they support or just leave the child. Sometimes the parents come, sometimes they just leave. And so the child never learns a reliable pattern on how to cope with their emotions. It's only when the parent comes and they feel safe that they feel like they don't feel threatened to play with their emotions and see how they can deal with them. And so the child learns that in order to cope with emotion, they need to rely on someone else to be there for them. They use other people to regulate themselves. And so, while I think that the emotion regulation skills aren't necessarily deficit, because they have some regulation skills, right? Because every time the parent comes, they learn to somewhat regulate themselves. So I'd argue that the anxious attachment style could be, on average, more mature than the avoidant, because the avoidant just never deals with emotions at all. Yeah, I still don't understand what the deal is with anxious attachment styles. Because I've met a lot of them, right? And they're usually quite, or very immature. But it's usually when there's a conflict, like I mess up one time, I don't reply within 4 hours of their text, and then they just start acting out on me. but I'm not sure. Because maturity is usually the ability to navigate conflict in a healthy way. And none of the anxious attachment stylers do that. They're not good at conflict. Even though, if I'm trying to logically think about it, it should be at least. They should at least have some conflict skills. Because they're a tiny bit more developed in that sense than avoidant attachers. But yeah, I'm gonna have to think about that. But the moral of the story is still just, while you should have some empathy for immature people, because they do the things they do because they don't know any better. Or they do know better, but they just don't have the discipline or willpower to go through the discomfort of doing better. They're so used to pushing things away or just not dealing with certain things that they just don't know how to deal with it. And of course, that should not be excused. You can try to help them if you want, but there's very little you can do to change them. You can support them, but they need to actually be the ones to want to change in the first place. Otherwise, it's just pointless. Try to stick with more mature people, and you'll never have to worry about this stuff. Like, trust me, bro, you do not want to be where I am right now. Of course, now I just sound sorry for myself. Like, they're not that bad, alright? It's like, they're not a nightmare to be around, but to be with is very tough. I don't pity myself. I take responsibility for letting myself get dragged into their drama. But it's just a lesson for anyone who wants to hear it. Immature people, they're just not worth it. I said that many times on my channel, but I think I'm the one who needs to hear it the most. But it's also nice to just understand how they think. Because these people just do things that I generally just don't understand. And it might just be because I haven't been like that in a really long time. I'm not immature as these people. I'm not saying I'm fully matured or whatever, but I'm definitely more mature than these people. And so it just makes it hard to understand them. Even though, by my own definition, I should be the most immature. Because I'm avoidant attachment style. Or I used to be anyway. I've been going on for almost 20 minutes, so I think I'll end it there. If you enjoy these discussions, you can join the link in the description. It'll take you to my community. And just work hard, or I'll be on your bed tonight.